They say 'tis better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. That is not even remotely true, and I'm going to live with this guilt for the rest of my life. My name is Rhys von Kirchner. I'm a tiefling bard, chronically alone, and this is D&D Storytime. Where do I begin with this one, folks? I don't even know. I have loved before, and it is not certain if I will ever love again. I mean, sure, you can do stuff with people, and I do that, but that's different than having a long and meaningful relationship with the man that you thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with. Thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with. Well, let's start at the beginning. This is gonna sound really long and convoluted, but please, I beg of you, please stay with me. I was in love with an older man. He was several years my elder, not too much older, but old enough that there was an attractive age gap. The thing is, though, when I met him, I was a couple years older than him. There's time travel involved, please hold on. I'm 26. Farron is 32. Was 32. The thing is that I have been 26 for almost 10 years. There is time travel involved, please let me explain. Because I am deserving of hell and running from death itself, I wound up in a lovely little place called Barovia. Now, for those of you who don't know, Barovia is its own little shadow dimension run by none other than Count Performance Anxiety himself, Strahd von Zarovich. I'll leave no spoilers for my hit play that is about to come out, but just know that there is a time gap going in and out of this dimension, and so while it only felt like a couple of weeks, I had actually been there for 8 years. So while I was trapped doing the monster mash with Cloven and Baba Lysaga, Farron Elliot Watterson was growing from the attractive 17-year-old boy that I met him as to the 32-year-old man who was definitely coming on to me. So I was a ripe young 26-year-old thing, and Farron Elliot Watterson was now 6 years my senior, which was pretty hot. The reason that Farron and I knew each other before this whole fiasco was because Farron and his little brother Lian helped me out on a bit of a side hustle I had. It was actually my main hustle, but that's not something that I like to tell myself when I fall asleep at night. Basically, I'd hop from city to city performing on the streets while Farron and Lian would pickpocket from the unsuspecting crowds that were enwrapped in my wonderful performance. We also had a tip jar, but that didn't pay nearly as much as just robbing them directly. These are not my proudest days. But when you told your mother that you had a more respectable day job in town, there's kind of a pressure to deliver. I'm sure my mother would have completely accepted me even if I was still robbing people blind off the streets. I was just really desperate to make rent because my mother's seamstressing business wasn't cutting it, as it were. That was a pun for those of you who needle it'll more explaining. I'm here all week. Lian was a little boy copied and pasted straight out of a Charles Dickens novel, living in an oversized jacket gifted to him by his brother, Farron, because, like me and my mother, the Wattersons weren't exactly living out of a McMansion. The Wattersons were strapped for cash because their father and grandfather would rather live out on the open seas than come back every once in a while to pay child support. And me and my mom were in a tight spot because, well, that's a whole other video on its own. So we're all wrapped up in this indie crime ring with another tiefling that I will drink to forget. That's another story for another day, and yes, that is the one that wound up with me in jail. So Lian and Farron and I were actually a pretty great team. I would play a little music using a little magic, while Farron acted like magician's assistant, giving Lian and his little boy hands an opportunity to sneak through the crowd and rummage through their belongings. It worked great. So we all moved around from place to place, sleeping in tents and blind old men's goat farms, and Farron and I became like adoptive parents to his little brother. We'd sit around the fire, eating whatever food we'd managed to snag from local bars, and I'd sing songs like lullabies to put Lian to sleep. It was goddamn precious. Then Farron and I would lay 5 feet apart and awkwardly glance at one another until we both fell asleep. We almost touched arms. Twice. So aside from the reeking stench of goat sweat and cow manure to keep us company, we really were like the perfect little family. 2.5 men sleeping on bales of hay and sneaking away from old MacDonald before he could sing E-I-E-I-O. But like I said, that whole thing ended up not really working out for me, and I left the crime ring to pursue other goals of mine, like getting a bachelor's degree in bardic nonsense. I went to clown school, I joined the circus. A few years later, wind up in the bad place, Strahd's place, and I have to spend a month or two being the fearless leader of a motley crew fighting our way out of the mists. When I finally get out, I wander for a little bit longer until I find myself in the company of a dwarf named Baldric and a terminally ill sorcerer named Ariel. Ariel was also kind of cute, but he had about 9 months to live. Baldric and Ariel were on a quest to find a cure for Ariel's incurable disease, and I was just kind of along for the ride. If we found the cure to incurable cancer, do you know how much money we would be making? making. We found out that we can make a little extra cash if we investigated what had been going down at a local monastery. People in town hadn't heard from them in a couple weeks. At the guild that posted the ad, we wound up teaming up with a graying old warlock with a cane. He was a sailor who retired against his will and was still itching for a little bit of adventure in his golden years. Salty Sea Dog ends up being quite the badass when it comes time to pick a fight. We were making our way through the thick of the forest when we start hearing some crunching noises, like a chopping or a jittering kind of noise, getting louder and louder. And next thing we know, a tree cut down by a freaking beaver comes toppling down, nearly missing me and Baldric, and falls directly on Walter, killing him instantly. If a tree falls down in a forest and murders your elderly warlock, has the tree made a pact with the old man's god? We're just getting over the shock when we hear footsteps coming from the other side of the tree. A handsome young man approaches us from the other side of the path and steps over the tree and the dead body. This man is Farron Watterson Jr., son of the sailor Farron Watterson, and the man that I had raised a child with all those years ago. He's looking incredibly sexy, and I am suddenly ready to adopt another. Whew. Long story short, Farron had been on the road for a while looking for, you guessed it, Walter, who turned out to be the late sailor, Walter Watterson. Farron remembered me instantly and called me a wonderful musician. It was like fate had brought us back together. Farron joins our party, and we find ourselves wrapped up in this temple business because it appeared some elementals had killed everyone in the monastery. We run to tell the Vatican. After just a few short nights of traveling together, Farron and I are really rekindling our love for one another. We were just on the verge of professing our affections when we were enlisted by the Vatican, aka the Church of Melora, to find out what exactly had been going down at the Temple of Air. On our way to the temple, we had to cross through a mountain and a cave, because the cave was apparently a shortcut through the mountain, or something. I really don't know. I was a bit tipsy. Is there anything new? The cave was the last place I would see Farron alive. Apparently, this cave was pretty damn important to someone, because although we can find nothing of interest, we're making our way through with a tour guide, by the way, and we happen to step on a trap and find ourselves taking a tumble 50 feet down into a pit. The tour guide died instantly. Thankfully, everyone else in the party is alive, even Ariel, despite the fact that we now have to fight our way through the dark and spooky cave filled with giant creepy crawlies. Everyone but Farron had dark vision. I was able to lead him courageously through the darkness. Then we stumbled on something we shouldn't have. We're making our way through the cave when we begin to see this strange glowing light. And we look down the weird cavernous cliff that we're standing on, and we see, much to our surprise, a city full of skeletons and the undead. And because we're a party full of dumbasses, all dressed up with nowhere to go, we decide to waltz right down into this grisly party where no one's still alive. By some deranged miracle, we managed to slip through town unnoticed. And then we find another thing that we really shouldn't have. Who knew there would be so much creepy dead stuff hanging out in caves? We enter a room with a strange glowing obelisk, and, like a sensible adventuring party, we move toward it. Not at all like moths to a lamp. It starts glowing more and more. And suddenly this dark spectral entity leaps out and starts attacking us. Chaos ensues, and we all quickly discover that we are the unfortunate meat pinatas at this graveyard smash. And Farron, taking the front line like the noble, chivalrous warrior that he was, looked like he was gonna be the first balloon to pop. We very quickly start to believe that we will, in fact, be leaving our bodies and souls at the door. With each hit this nightmare specter took at us, it drained a little bit more of your life. Farron fought valiantly on, but we could tell it was really taking a toll on him, and I had to watch in horror as my would-be boyfriend had all of the life slowly sucked out of him from some twisted dementor looking for his prisoner from Azkaban. The spooky glowing obelisk appears to be controlling the monster, and Farron knows this, and it's spitting more monsters at us. So valiantly, with his dying breaths, Farron exclaims, "Destroy the obelisk!" Just as he makes a sizable dent in it, and the monster takes the last bit of his life, I watched him slip right out of my arms. Yes, Farron, we destroyed the obelisk, and the monsters dropped dead, or rather, became dead again. Unfortunately, it was too late for Farron. He was well past the point of being revived. I hurl myself over his dead body like it's the last act of Hamlet, and the party has to drag me out of the cave by my horns, dead body in tow. And that is how I lost the love of my life. And if we weren't crossing the Valley of the Shadow of Death to do some private investigating that the Vatican was too wimpy to do for themselves, my almost husband would still be here. We were so close to confessing our love. So freaking close. Destroy the obelisk. I could almost hear the "I love you" in those words. Sometimes I can still hear his voice when I fall asleep at night. Farron, you will live on, forever in our hearts. And my heart will somehow have to go on. as well.